Okay. So we're now on the Mishnah on Daf Tzadi Zayin Amid Beis, which is about 1/3 or more than 1/3 down the Now this Mishnah is going to address the laws of Yibum Chalitza in different scenarios of brothers that underwent gerus. And we've said many times that Kieshu Achim Yachdav is Achim is Miuchadim. Miuchadim means Lenachla, which means that not biological brothers, but legal brothers according to the halacha, according to the Torah law. Now, another dimension of what we're going to study in our Mishnah is the Isra Arayos. Now, the Isra Arayos, in a case of what's called Kurvas Mishpacha, which is otherwise known based on the Torah formulations called She'er Basar, that doesn't apply in the case of Ger. In fact, Ger is Kikatan Chenolad. Are you familiar with that phrase? Or should I explain
it? Can you explain it?
Yeah. Kikatan Chenolad means that a Ger is considered like a newborn baby. He's not related to any of his old biological relatives. It's very hard for us to imagine that, if a non-Jew undergoes gerus, he can act, again, I'll get in deep trouble for saying this. It's not politically correct, but according to Torah law, he can marry his own mother. He's not related to any of his biological relatives. Again, there are all sorts of Rabbanans involved. But on a Torah level, biblically, he's not related to anyone. He's kikata. He's like a newborn baby that came from somewhere. He has no yichus whatsoever to any of his relatives. So let's say, for example, you have a woman who's not Jewish, but she undergoes gerus. If she gives birth to two brothers, I don't mean twins necessarily, but two boys, subsequent to gerus, then what's the status of those brothers as far as Yibum is concerned? Because they're certainly born Jewish. You don't apply the principle of Kikatan Shenolad because the mother underwent gerus before they were born. But on the other hand, are they considered brothers as far as Yibum is concerned? Then we're going to have D'Rabbanans to come to. I'm just giving you a little bit of a background. You can have, certain D'Rabbanans that apply even while they go. I mean, there are arayos that apply to a ben Noach, 6 arayos, and now even after gerus, the Rabbanan said that we're going to continue the old arayos that applied when they were non-Jews. That's all the Rabbanan. We're going to suspend that principle that I mentioned to you before of Kikatan, so that a non-Jew, according to our Torah, is not allowed to marry his mother. She's one of the 6 arayos that are included in B'nai Noach. That Gili Arayos is one of the 6 mitzvahs of B'nai Noach. But again, it's very limited. It only applies to 6 arayos. For us, we have on Yom Kippur, we read all of Achrei Mos Kedoshim. The list is endless, of all the arayos. But in the case of a Ben Noach, there are 6 arayos. 2 of them, by the way, and 6 on Mishka B'Zochar and Mishka Behema. So in reality, in terms of relatives, there are only 4 arayos for a non. One of them is his mother. And now let's say she undergoes gerus, that Isur of arayos that existed before she underwent gerus, as a banah, which is imo, is going to midrabanan continue to exist after her gerus. We're not going to allow gerus to remove Isurei arayos that were chal before the gerus. So in this case, midrabanan, there are Isurei arayos that apply even after the gerus, and that's going to have a major impact on the laws of Yibum, as we'll soon see. So let's start the Mishnah now. Hagiores shenis gairu baneha ima. So the mother brings her children with her for gerus, and they're all misgayer. Now let's take a pause here before we get back to Yibum. Is that valid? Well, I understand the mother, she's a mature woman. She's what's called a bar das, and she can accept upon herself 613 mitzvahs in front of a bezdin and undergo gerus. But what about her children? How old are her children? Let's assume her children are very young. They're infants. They're not capable of das, of Kabbalah's own. So what does it mean when it says this Gairu Banea Ima?
That's the older than 9 or 13 or whatever.
Then the Mishnah should have qualified. It doesn't. It says this Gairu Banea Ima. It sounds like she's schlepping along these children.
I'm saying, but now I mean, it's not about that. Whether that's 9 years old or 13, I don't know. If they were Italian, say Italian.
You're saying that what? That
Now,
it doesn't mention ketanim, so it means that they're not ketanim. Well, I said the opposite, that if it doesn't mention ketanim, it means that they are ketanim. I don't know. So for that, you have to know a Gemara in Ksubis, a very famous Gemara. Like one of my closest relatives adopted two children, actually, from different times, different families, a boy and a girl that were goyim, and they were megayer them as children, as infants. And that's a Gemara in Ksubis. It's called Ger Katan, megayer no so al das bezdin, meaning
until the mitzvah.
correct. And it means that a parent can bring their children for gerus. Now, there are two scenarios. One is where Bezdin decides to be megayer a non-Jewish child. Like, for example, in our family case that I'm referring to, close relative of mine, makes me an uncle to Gerim. And these Gerim became Gerim at the age of 0, almost, right after they were born. They were given up for adoption by non-Jewish families. And Bezdin was megayer. Then there's another case where the non-Jewish parent himself or herself decide to become Gerim, and they bring their little children with them for Gerus. Now that Gerus, in either of those two scenarios, is a contingent Gerus. What do I mean by contingent? That Gerus will really depend upon something that's going to happen when the children become older. In a case of a boy at the age of 13, a girl at the age of 12, they have to confirm or affirm the Gerus. However, the Gemara says in Ksubis, they have a right to be mochen, to object to the Gerus and say, I don't want this Gerus. And in that case, there are two major issues in halacha that, they're fighting back and forth. One issue is, does that mecha, when they object and protect, does that chalam afreya retroactive? Which means that these children were never Jews. And the second issue is what happens in a case of a ger katan who does not make an official formal mecha, but his behavior pattern indicates that Judaism and observance is a burden for that person, for that him or her. They want the life of freedom. They don't want the life of Tariq mitzvahs. So is it mecha in a formal sense? So you have many children who were adopted as children, and let me use the phrase, they go off the derech. By the time they're 13 years old, in the case of a boy, no interest whatsoever in Yiddishkeit. They're not observant. Is that a mecha, or do they have to show up in a bezdin and make a formal protest? I don't want this gerus. So in that sense, the mecha element in ger katan indicates that ger katan is a contingent gerus, and it's not, shall we say, irreversible. That's a double negative. It is reversible. is gairu banea ima. So now we have the following scenario. we have a woman, non-Jewish woman, who was misgayer, together with two boys. They also were misgayer. Now, each one of these two boys married, one married Sarah and the other married Rivka. And now the question is, if one of these two boys dies without children, does his wife fall for Yibum to his other brother? Now, what's the tzad to say that they're brothers? They were both misgayer together with their mother. It was like one family operation. There's no nefila for Yibum from one brother to the other. Now, I have a diagram for this. I don't know if it's necessary. It's on page Gimel. Do you have it? What's the last diagram that you have? Phase? Wait a minute. Let's just see what the number is. Of Kuf Lamed Zayin. Lamed Vav. All right. It's not. I don't think it's complicated. I'll just go through the diagram about Peh. And if you like, you'll photocopy it afterwards. He says the following. That Goy Shenasa Goy. Okay, so we don't give them names as Goy, but one guy marries a Goyita. And V'yolda lo shnei banim. Okay, so she has two sons from that marriage. V'nisgaira ha'em im banem. Okay, so once this Geras, we can give them names. So Nikru Shmam B'Yisrael gets very dramatic here. Ruvain v'Shimon. Now he has a whole discussion here, the name of the Ritva, but I want to leave this for a little bit later down the line. That L'chora, there's a problem here. The Mishnah added information that's totally irrelevant. L'chora. I mean, the Ritva is going to answer this. It's not irrelevant, but why is it relevant to tell us that the mother was misgayer? I mean, in laws of Yibum, the mother never plays a role in Yibum. You want to talk about two brothers, that's relevant if they share the same father, not if they share the same mother. Okay, fine. So the Ritva is going to give his answer that there's a chiddush here in the fact that these are brothers from the same mother. Okay. Now, Nasa Ruvain is Sar. Umeis Ruvain below Bana. Shimon locholetz below miyabim is Sar. Umuteres Sar linase l'shuk miyad. Mishum she'eno nechshav achiv shel Ruvain. Even though, again, they share the same biological father, and that should make them Achim and Av, but
Jewish.
They're not Jewish. If Kira HaTorah es Zarei HaGoy, the Torah says that there's no yichus between Gerim in this case and their non-Jewish father. Again, it's very hard on an emotional level to accept this. You know what I mean? I know people. That one of my closest students, so to speak, here in the ELC, his father is Jewish, his mother is not. And he's going for, he himself called it Sylvester, which I assume means Xmas. Yeah. He's going to Australia, not to Australia, I'm sorry, to California for, California's on the way to Australia. He's going to California for Sylvester to spend time with his mother. I asked him, is his mother a churchgoer? He said, once in a while. Not an avid Christian, but she's a Christian. And I asked him, how old is his mother? He tells me she's 93. But he says, don't worry about it. She'll live much longer because her mother died at the age of 104. And her aunt is already close to 100. Anyway, it's apparently good, healthy stock. And he's going to visit his mother. But wait, on a Torah level, it's not his mother at all. But go tell him that. He knows it. I mean, he himself is a ger, but he wants to visit his mother. But in this case, I don't know of one. Chalitza is complicated enough for Jews. Oh, okay, so that's a parsha that has to be understood. Okay. I don't know if I can, let me just get through this mission if I can. And then we'll talk about Yehuda and Tamar and Erev Yonon and all that. He says, Lefishef Kira Torah Zera God. So these two brothers are not related through a father. The father is not Jewish. Even if the father would subsequently go through Gerus, it's irrelevant. Is Ein Banav Misyachsim Achrei Aviv. Umemela Einam Nechshavim Achim in Av, V'lo Shayach Lo Yibum V'lo Chalitz. So far, it's pretty simple. But then he writes the following. Ubimikre Zeh Shenoldu Shneim Shelo B'Kedusha. Now he throws another element to the equation. When did they undergo Gerus? It was way after their conception, if you will. In other words, you can imagine a different scenario, which is not our scenario, where two goyim, a man and a woman, were married, and they underwent Gerus, and then she became pregnant after the Gerus. So I'm saying, in contrast to our case, so you got to get the terminology down, because it's going to come up over and over again. Our case is a case of what's called Horoso V'leidoso Shelo B'Kedusha. Shelo B'Kedusha. In other words, the birth of these two boys, they would not choose. And therefore, they are not Achim in Av. But what would be in the following scenario, where the father, together with his wife, the mother of these two boys, underwent Gerus before these boys were born? Then we have a third case. What happens if the non-Jewish mother, together with a non-Jewish husband, conceived these boys while they were going, and then they underwent Gerus during the pregnancy stage? That's called Horoso Shelo B'Kedusha, V'leidoso B'Kedusha. At the time of the Leda, these two boys, let's say they were twins, for argument's sake, they were born B'Kedusha. So he writes the following. B'mikra, in our case of our Mishnah, Noldu Shneim Shelo B'Kedusha. After they were born, this guy, the Einom Nechshavim Achim Gam Min Ha'em. In other words, they're not even related as brothers to the same mother. Mishum Shegoy Shenisgayer Hareu Kikot Shenola. Okay. So fine. Now, wait, just give me 1 minute, David. I'm sorry. I just want to finish this one little piece so I have my head on straight. He says the following. Imrotze Shimon Lisa as Eshes Reuven. So again, there's no mitzvah of Yibum for Shimon to marry, what was her name? Eshes Shimon Sarah, I think. He doesn't have any mitzvah to marry Sarah, but he wants to marry Sarah. So his brother Reuven died, and he, on his own initiative, wants to marry Sarah. She's a very attractive lady, whatever. So he says this is going to be a bone of contention. One opinion says Rashi, Lefisha Eina Nechsheves Eshes Achiv. Right? We only allow a man to marry the wife of his brother through the mitzvah of Yibum, but here there's no mitzvah of Yibum. But nevertheless, she's not Eshes Achiv. Why? Because a Torah of Kia Zaro Shel Goyim. It means that what? they're not brothers. If they're not brothers, then his late brother's wife is not Eishes Achim. That's one opinion. Now we have a second opinion. Now I didn't read the second opinion, but my intuition tells me that the second opinion is going to deal with the D'Rabbanan. Remember, as we said in the introduction, we always have to differentiate here between Doraisas and D'Rabbanans. But let's see if I'm right. Oh, now he gets the second opinion. Shekavonas HaMishnah, when it says Lo Choltzim V'Lo Misyavim, he Isur Yivum, not to exempt you from the mitzvah of Yivum. That's simple. That's understood. But the Mishnah really wants to go a step further and tell you that there's not even an option of Yivum. Lefi, Shechachamim, okay, that's good. It's true. Hirshivo Osam Ke'achim, the Torah considers them as Achim because she, the mother, converted together with these two boys. And Midrabanan, they are considered like brothers. Now, the father is out of the picture. I don't know why. Maybe because he's still a guy and he was a Miskayer, or maybe even if he was Miskayer, they were born before he was Miskayer, so therefore. But in the case where she was Miskayeres together with these two boys, according to the second view, Eino Misyaberes means also Lisyaben because we will consider them as two Achim that share the same mother. Again, in Yibum, sharing the same mother is irrelevant. But as far as Eishes Ach is concerned, and I think we've seen this before, Eishes Ach applies even Achiv Min Ha'em. So you have two brothers that are maternal brothers. They share the same mother. And one of them wants to marry his late brother's wife. There's no mitzvah yibum, he's not allowed to marry her. That's Eishes Achim. Here, Mirabbanan, it's considered Eishes Achim because they share the same mother. L'fisha chachamim ichshivu osam ke'achim min ha'em, kidei shelo yitu v'yachlifu beinam levein Yisrael gom. Yavo lahatir Eishes Ach min ha'em v'Yisrael gom. So again, in the eyes of the spectator, it looks like they're brothers. I mean, after all, they had a common gerus together with their mother. So if you're going to allow Shimon to marry Reuven's, his late brother's, biological brother's wife, Sarah, then in the eyes of the spectator is going to say, you know what? Why was Rav Moshe Feinstein decided to condition at this wedding? And the answer is because they're only Achim and A'em. They only share the same mother. And they believe that they share the same mother because the gerus was done together with the mother, which is not true because, again, it's so Russell Shalom. So they're really not brothers. But in the eyes of the public, since the gerus was like a common house gerus, they think of them as brothers. So they're going to look at Rav Moshe Feinstein and say, wait a minute, why is Shimon marrying Eishes roommate? She's Achos. She's Eishes Achri. They're only brothers from the mother. And that's going to come to a takala because then we're going to assume that you're allowed to marry your maternal brother's wife. Let's go back to the Mishnah. Afilu Horoso shall Harishon shalo b'kedusha, v'leidaso b'kedusha, v'asheni Horoso v'leidaso b'kedusha. Wow! Now we're getting to some exciting scenarios here. There's another diagram for that, but I don't think we need a diagram because what's happening is that we'll call him Reuven, the Rishon. His mother was a Goyeta at the time that he was an embryo. But by the time he was born and he popped his head out, his mother had already converted. So he had a Leida B'Kedusha. Hasheni and his younger brother Shimon was not only born B'Kedusha, but he already had even a Horaso B'Kedusha, meaning she, the mother, was Miskayeres even before he was conceived. No Chalitza, no Yibum. They're not brothers. Because the Mishnah holds that in order for two brothers to be considered brothers, it's not enough that they had a Leidasa B'Kedusha. It's not even enough that one of the two brothers had a Rasa Kedusha. But since one of the brothers was a Rasa Shalo B'Kedusha, therefore he's not considered a brother. Or maybe that's not what's pshat. Wait a minute. Maybe what the Mishnah is saying is that they share the same mother, but they don't share the same father. And what was going on at the time of the gerus of the mother? She was pregnant with Reuven. She underwent gerus. Reuven was born, and Shimon was conceived and born. So we said that we're not going to allow Shimon to marry Sarah, Reuven's wife. That's midrabanan. Looks like she's achos. Oh, achi. Mineshes achi. Here, once again, go back to the Dorais. See, I'm trying to figure this out on two levels, on a Dorais level and Dorais. So on a Dorais level, they're achim min ha'im. I mean, even if I were to grant you that they're achim min ha'im, that would have no impact on Yibum. Why is the Mishnah obfuscating? It's such a complicated case. I mean, why not say, but what would be if both brothers had Horosom and Lidosu B'Kedusha? It'd still not be brothers. I don't get it. In Achim min ha'im has no bearing on Yibum unless we're talking about a D'Rabbanan. Rabbi, you follow where I got stuck here?
Well, the father is Jewish.
Oh, Jewish by birth.
Jewish by birth. He marries a non-Jewish wife.
The Mishnah couldn't even imagine.
She converts.
It's
She converts while she's pregnant.
Let's say
Reuven, and then Shimon is born from the same union.
Let's give a simple case. Let's say she converted before Reuven and Shimon were a thought in anyone's mind. So in that case, there should be Yibum.
Right. And they're strictly brothers.
Okay. Now, what was your case?
So the case instead, she converts while she's pregnant with Reuven.
Right.
Has Reuven, and
then has
the same marriage she has now.
Okay, so let's just think about this.
So they have the same,
since the father is Jewish, they share the same mother and father.
Yeah. But
since Reuven was conceived Shalo B'Kedusha, therefore, the Mishnah is telling us they're not brothers. Wow. I mean, the Mishnah is putting a tremendous emphasis on Hora, on the Hirayon, as we
Rabbi. The English.
Don, are you with me?
Yeah, the English footnote seems to
Yeah.
indicate that the salient feature here is that the father converts between the birth of the first and the second son, and they're not paternal brothers. And therefore you can't have Yivun and
Wait,
Kaliph.
let me go slowly between the birth of the. So in other words, what happened was that Reuven was born, and then
The father
guy-
converts.
father converts. That's what
Right.
happened.
Right, and then the second one, even though it
One
doesn't say
second.
it in the Mishnah, this
One
seems
second.
to be,
So when was she? When I want to know, Rosso. Yeah, but it says Leidaso B'Kedusha. Wait a minute. Leidaso B'Kedusha means that she converted before the Leda. And when did he convert? He converted after the Leda?
No,
he converted after the later of the first one.
Yeah, let's focus on Reuven for a minute.
That's the first one.
First,
Right.
so you're saying the following, that the script, the sequence, the chronology was the following, that the mother became pregnant. She's not Jewish. Her husband's not Jewish.
Correct.
So she conceived of Reuven. Reuven's an embryo, right?
Right.
Then she undergoes Gerus.
Correct.
She gives birth to Reuven, and then her husband is misguided.
Converts. Right.
Is that the case?
That seems to be the case they're indicating.
In that case, they're not brothers at all.
They're not brothers on the paternal level. They're
One
not
second.
paternal brothers.
You're saying they may be maternal brothers. Let's see. How would they be maternal brothers? Because since she underwent the Gerus before Reuven was born, so they might be maternal brothers.
Right.
But they're not paternal brothers because, but one second. Why are you complicating it? Why don't we say that the father was this guy before the Leda? Before the Leda, 1 second. If he was this guy before the Leda, there's so many different possibilities. If he was misguided after the conception, but before the Leda, maybe they would still be considered brothers.
This is the second case in the Mishnah. That's all.
But there's another case in the Mishnah.
No,
So
second case
he's
in the
reading a footnote from something.
From the
No.
where
This is.
show.
I mean, later we'll have a case of a shifcha and a shtayer, but we're not talking about the case of shifcha. We're talking about a case of horoso b'kedusha, the rishon, v'leidaso. I'm sorry, horoso shelo b'kedusha, leidaso b'kedusha, and the sheni was both horoso v'leidaso v'lo b'kedusha. So we're trying to figure out, based on this footnote, I don't have it in front of me. Do you have it? No, I don't need. You hold on to it because otherwise. But what is that? That's already a different volume.
That's your,
These both belong to the LC. I see. So again, you tell me, David. Don has his copy of the article, and you have that copy also. So tell me if you both agree with the following, that the scenario in the Mishnah is that there was a pregnancy of Reuven while nothing was going on as far as Gerus is concerned. Then, after she became pregnant with Reuven, she underwent Gerus. She gives birth to Reuven. So Reuven's status is Hora'aso Shelo B'Kedusha, V'leidaso B'Kedusha. And after he is born, then her husband, we'll call John Paul Jones, he becomes a ger, we'll call him Avram. How he becomes Avram the ger. And clearly in this case, they're not brothers from the father, which I'm very comfortable with that, but just it boggles my mind that you had to introduce this, unless he wants to tell me a chiddush, that they are brothers. 1 second. Not brothers with mother and father. Let me just read. He says that Shabbat. I just want to know if you have the case right. That's all I'm asking right now. Oh, listen to this. This is important. Maybe you have that also in your footnote. Oh, beautiful. He's saying that since they both had a common Leda B'Kedusha, forget about the father for a moment, therefore they are considered brothers from the mother, because somehow brotherhood is created by Leda. Umikol makom, ein kan mitzvahs yibum. Why? Kevan shechovas yibum yirak ba'achim min ha'av. Okay. V'ger shahoroso hoiset shelo b'kedusha, eino nechshav b'no shel aviv. If I understand correctly, this is an unbelievable chiddush. What we're saying is that as far as having a common brotherhood relationship through the mother, all we need is Leda. If you follow the Makadesh here of the sanctity of a Jew is Leda. The fact that the embryo came from a non-Jew is irrelevant. But as far as creating brotherhood through the father, it's not enough to have Leda, you say. 1 second. Just 1 second. No, you're telling me the conversion of the father took place after the Leda. That
After the first one,
yeah, I don't have that here. Maybe that's in art scroll. Just 1 second. What I have here, he's telling me that everything depends upon the Horah. I don't know. Again, I'll
But he says Hashem. He's Hashem.
But again, the point of the Mishnah, if I understand it correctly, just based on what I have in front of me, I don't have the art scroll in front of me. You'll tell me what the art scroll would say to me. But what I have in front of me, I think, if I understand it correctly, is that to be brothers from the same father, you need Hora also B'Kedusha. I don't have to introduce here the fact that the father was Misgayer after the Leda. That to me is an irrelevant factor. Again, I'm not coming to argue against the art scroll. Don't get sensitive about it. I'm just trying to work out pshat so that I understand the art scroll. That's my ultimate goal. Right now, I don't understand the art scroll because it seems to me that even if the gerus of the father took place before the Leda, the same exact halach would apply, because to create achim and av, I need hora also b'kedusha. That's what I'm reading here. And that's not what you're saying there.
And they might be saying, said it was after the birth, but you could have just.
Well, I don't know. I wouldn't go that far in accusing art scroll of that. Art scroll is saying that the father converted after Leda. I don't know why that's relevant here. Don?
Well, the mission doesn't mention the father at all. So I found it strange that the footnote seems to hang the whole thing on the father's conversion.
No, but listen to the Masechet. The Masechet is saying that Ger Shahora also Haisa Shalo B'Kedusha. Listen carefully. Eino Nechshav B'no Shel Aviv. We just finished saying that since they were both born B'Kedusha, they are brothers for the common mother. But when you want to establish common brother through the same father, he says, is Kevan Shahora Aso Haisa Shalo B'Kedusha Eino Nechshav B'no Shel Aviv. That's why I told you I got very excited about this, because what I'm seeing in front of me is a very revolutionary idea that you can create achva from a common mother through Leda, even though one of them had a horasa shalom b'kedusha. It doesn't matter because the Leda was b'kedusha. So you have two brothers that were born b'kedusha. They are brothers through the mother. But yet, in contrast, paradoxically, you cannot generate achva min ha'av once it was Leda. And when I say, Hora, and again, Hora here means one of the two brothers. I don't need to say both of them. As long as one of the two brothers had Hora shalom b'kedusha, the father's out of the picture. Why is he out of the picture? Again, I'm going to use very gas terms. You'll be moichel me, I hope. because his sperm had no kedusha to it, and therefore the yichus goes back to the pregnancy. And at the time of the pregnancy, he was a god. No, I had nothing against him. He's my best ger friend. You know what I mean? I love him to pieces. And after this again, but I have to tell you that if he wants to establish a halachic fatherhood, it's totally in hora. And honestly, I'm very comfortable with that on a halachic level, because what connects him? Does the Leda connect him? In the case of a mother, the Leda was B'Kedusha. Again, I'm going to use terms here, and you'll be much me. Her womb is Kadosh. And that generates a Kedusha through the Leda. I mean, it says in the Mishnah, Leidasa B'Kedusha. So I'm not the one to invent this concept of Leidasa B'Kedusha. Both these brothers had Leidasa B'Kedusha from the same mother. And that Leda is Makadisha, but it has no bearing on the father, because the father's fatherhood is dependent upon the Horah. That's what I see here. And you're telling me that his Gerus was after the birth. Irrelevant. I couldn't care less. All I have to know is one question. When was the Horah? What was his status at the time of the Horah? You done?
What if he didn't convert what if he didn't convert at all? So
right, no, so if he didn't convert at all, then, are you familiar with the Yiddish word upgeret? Upgeret means pshita my kamashma. Yeah, I don't have to tell you that they're not brothers from the same father if the father's a god. I want to tell you that even if the father converts, but he converted after the Horah, he's not considered the father, and they're not achim and av, hence there's no yibum, there's no chalitza, and that's what it means. But the article, for some reason, which I don't know why, is insisting that he converted not after the Horah, but after the Leda. And that seems to me to be a foreign element here that you're throwing into the equation that could only confuse us. Can you read it one more time? Read it out loud one more time, or maybe I'll borrow David's.
No, I just want to ask you. So you're saying that if the father converted after the Horah, then that's what this is. That's what this means.
That undermines his status. The former John Paul Jones, who's now Avram Hager. That undermines his status as a father to these two brothers. They cannot be considered Achim and Av because they're lacking Horaso B'Kedusha. And that's what it says here. It says, Ger Horaso Hoisa Shalo B'Kedusha, Eino Nechshav B'no Shel Avid. I'm just reading to you what he says. Again, he's not more chashuv than Atzko, but
no, but I think it's the same thing.
I mean, if you look at the who's list at the beginning of this thing, I mean, it's a pretty impressive cadre of Talmidei Chachamim.
I'm not arguing in favor of Atzko. I just raised it as a question in the beginning. But I think it's the same thing. The fact that the father converts after the Horah, but before the birth, or whether he converts after the birth and before the conversion of the second one, I think it's the same thing. That's the fact that the first one.
I'm just saying, if Art Scroll, I didn't see the Art Scroll, so I'm relying on you, Don, because I asked you to confirm that this is what Art Scroll was saying. If Art Scroll is telling me, it's funny, I never gave a shir on Art Scroll in my life, and I've been giving shir for a good couple of years. But if Art Scroll is telling me that the scenario here is that the father converted after Leda, then I'm accusing Art Scroll, until we figure out the Art Scroll, that they're confusing us. Because now we're confused, because at the time of Leda, he was still a guy, so maybe you can't connect the Leda to the father. That's irrelevant.
Agreed.
What's relevant is the moment of Horah. Okay, then that's where I see is he has a footnote here. Let's just see if he adds something in the footnote. Bereisha oisale dasam shelo b'kedusha skayru acher leidasam is gam heim gam lonet shavim liachim in a aim. Okay, fine, because then the Leda was not right. She brought the two sons alive and well for Gerus. Came and Gerus gekatan shenola and them. Ubeseifa shel Leda shneim haisa b'kedusha harehem achim min a aim umin Torah. Also, call echad mehem lases as ashes achid. Elishal inyan yibum v'chalitza. No, that's a whole different story. Ein chiluk Imheim b'nei osa em olo. The fact that they have a common mother, that's not relevant to Yibum. And therefore, since there's no yichus, and again he emphasizes in the footnote what we saw in the text itself, that hoisa hora aso shel arishon shel b'keducha eno nechshav li'achim min ha'av. They don't have a common father because the horasa was shel b'keducha. So when you add to tell me that the scenario is that the father underwent gerus after the later, you're only confusing yourself, I think.
I'm going to apologize. I read it wrong. It says that the father converted sometime after the conception of the first and the second. So it was my mistake. So you were right and I was wrong. I read it wrong.
We're still friends, but you owe me one. Well, I owe you one for buying a computer where I can see your face, but you owe me one for getting very excited and accusing ArtScroll of confusing us. Well, but before you read the text to me, and it said that he converted after the birth. Didn't you read that?
I seem to have read it wrong, and I apologize. I read it wrong.
You converted, explain the concession.
Okay. Shalom al Yisrael. We're all on the same page.
But
I love you, ArtScroll. I love you.
But I still have the question then.
It's too late to sponsor ArtScroll. They have a list of 5 pages of sponsors. I wonder how much each one paid for that. A lot of those names are friends of mine. Really, not joking.
But if the father originally is Jewish, when she does the conversion after conception, is that son still considered? That's an excellent question. So let me just reiterate Steve's question, because this is an excellent question. What happens? Wait a second. She gave birth after she converted to both brothers? They're brothers. Not relevant to Hebrew. But not from the father. I mean, the first son.
Just 1 second.
Is not.
Maybe. I'm not 100% sure what I'm telling you is correct. I have to research it further, but my intuition tells me I couldn't care less what happens to the father. If she converted and then gave birth to 2 boys, they are achim min ha'av da'oraisa, and therefore he could not marry her, his brother's wife, and he can't marry his brother's wife. I hope I'm not wrong in that. It seems to me that there's a new halacha here in Achva min ha'em called Leda. That Leda is Mekadesh. It's a phenomenal concept that Leda is Mekadesh.
Would he have to go through a Pidyon Ben?
Pidyon Ben is an obligation on the father, so there's no father here in this case. If he undergoes gerus, would there be Pidyon Ben? I doubt it.
No, but the father is Jewish.
Yeah.
The mother converts after conception, but before later.
I'm going to assume in that case there would be a few Pidyon Ben. Because again, Leda is Makadesh, and that connects him to the mother. He's connected to the father because he was Jewish. He's Jewish.
But I mean, he's kind of.
But again, Steve, you can't. It's not fair. You're putting me over the coals here. I'm not learning Pidyon Ben.
Yeah,
obviously, we have just touched on, let me call it a gold mine, so to speak. Meaning, I don't even know where this is going to take us. You follow what I mean? I don't even think we're at the tip of the iceberg. Not even at the tip of the iceberg, because I realize here that there's so many different variables. If Tmura is complicated, I think this is even more complicated.
Yeah, I mean,
So you're asking about Pidyon Ben.
The embryo.
He was Jewish.
Transformed after the fact.
Charles will have to doesn't need to be Mikhail.
I'm trying to argue that if it's leidaso b'kedusha, there's no gerus.
That's it. That's all point.
But Steve is asking a different question. What's the relationship with the father if there was horasa shelo b'kedusha? The father may have been, the great grandson of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. He's got the greatest Jesus in the world, but he had a relationship with a non-Jewish woman. And if everything depends upon Zera, he is not the father of these children. Hence, he's not chayav in Pidyon Ben.
But the yichus is always on the father.
For Pidyon Ben, it depends on the father.
No, I'm saying in Jewish law, the yichus is on the father.
Well, here we have a case, it's on the mother because,
No. It's two different things.
What do you mean?
Because the yichus goes on the father, that means if your father's a Kohen, you are a Kohen, or a lady, or whatever.
Right.
He was a guy. That's why when he makes her pregnant, he's still a guy. They've got no yichus, there's no yichus with the child. With the mother, even if she's pregnant when she's not converted, and she converts before she has the baby, so the baby's born Jewish. There's no garrus here. So therefore the child is Jewish, but because the father did it while he was a guy, there's no yichus there. That's why there's no
yibum. Yeah, everything you
nothing.
said, I agree with 100%. I can't even add anything. You said it better than I said. Well,
there's
beautiful.
no brothers. There's no brothers. The brothers from the mother.
Right, but Steve was wondering, in the case of a Jewish father, would there be a possibility that the children, even if it was Horasa Shalom B'Kedusha, it would be a Chiv of Pidyon Ben? In a case where she converted before the conception, there's no question about it. We have perfect
It's not
Yuchsin.
about the father being Jewish.
That was Steve's question.
No, but also he's Jewish doesn't make a difference.
Well, no, it makes a difference because she's Jewish. But I asked a different question. I want to know if she's not Jewish and he's Jewish.
No, but then she had the baby after she converted.
So I'm saying there's no yichus to the father.
Why?
Because he wasn't Jewish at the time of the Horah.
I said it's Jewish. You said the father was Jewish.
Oh, I'm sorry. Because I meant to say she wasn't Jewish at the time of the Horah. Sorry, I slipped my
Yeah, but
head.
that doesn't matter. But at birth, the child doesn't need to be.
No, but it doesn't matter. There's no yichus between the father because his zera went into that of a non-Jewish woman. He can never claim fatherhood in the kids.
That's nice.
You understand? That's, I think, Steve's point.
Right.
On the one hand, there was Leila B'Kedusha, the man was Jewish, he's a great-grandson of Zeskayim to the most outstanding family. Why not say that there's a yichus here? But there is no yichus. Why? Because she was impregnated, Shalom B'Kedusha. He could be a Kadosh V'Tar. But I'm sorry, my friend, you're living with a non-Jewish woman. Again, I'm not blaming him. Maybe he didn't know. He could come up with 50 million options. He thought she had gay. Today, again, I don't want to get into contemporary life, but today there's so many situations. I have a friend of mine who's in charge of a woman's Balchuva yeshiva. And he tells me that 50% of these girls are not Jewish, according to Talmud, even though we assume they're all Jewish. Why do we assume they're Jewish? Because their mother underwent gayrus. Even what kind of gayrus? Today we live in such a world. You can have this gayrus, that gayrus, call it gayrus from now till doomsday, but it's not gayrus. So the man married a woman thinking that she is Jewish. That happens all the time. They find out, lo and behold, she's not Jewish. So I'm not blaming him for it. He could be, we're not giving him public tar and feather, but it's a rasa shalom b'kedusha. I doubt if there'd be any yichus in that. Because when it comes to the father, there's nothing but hora. When it comes to the mother, that's a whole different story. Again, not for yuchsin as far as Kohen Levi Yisrael or as far as Nachla, not as far as Yibum, but as far as being achim min ha'em, which generates a new iser erba, then it leidas of the it's enough to generate achim min ha'em. It's pretty wild. My son did kiruv work for a year in Portland, Oregon. There's a community there of mostly South African Jews, thousands. In one high school, a public high school, there are 5,000 Jewish students. And they are so so far from Yiddishkeit, you can't believe it. The girl who, at that time, this is 10 years ago, but the girl who's in charge of the Kiruv project from the high school age, so maybe she was 18, she just graduated, is not Jewish. Her first name is Shana. I'm not going to tell you her last name because he made Aliyah, but her father has a typical last name that's Jewish because he's Jewish. The problem is her mother was not Jewish. And she underwent some sort of fly-by-night conversion. And they called the girl Shana. And she is in charge of all the Kiruv operation. in that area of Portland, Oregon. But the only problem is she's not Jewish. This is what we're up to. I mean, Masechet Yevamot. You could have a seminary today for Balas Chuvas, and you assume they're all Jewish. You might find out the number of surprises. So we're in a balagan. That's why this sugya that we're learning now, I'm hoping we'll sort it all out, because it's very relevant, to get an idea of who's Jewish and who's not. Okay, then? All right, have a great day.